Next question is from Real Dev Bro, and it's what's the radar for? What is the radar for, Rob?
So this Tracer 9 GT Plus, in the Tracer 9 lineup, you've got the standard bike, you've got the Tracer 9 GT, and then you've got the Tracer 9 GT Plus now, which is new for this year. And one of the big updates and new features is a front-facing radar. So as you can imagine, much like the BMW Taurus, the Multistrada V4, the KTM 1290 Super Adventure, it allows them to implement adaptive or active cruise control. So the idea is that you set a top speed that you're willing to do, and anything beneath that, or when you close in on traffic, if it's going slower than that, the bike will slow you down and just follow the cars in front until they speed back up to that point, and then it won't exceed the speed that you've set. So let's say you've set it to 70 and the car in front starts doing 75, it'll stay at 70, but it's just when the traffic slows down, it maintains a preset distance. And I think there's 3 or 4 distance settings, so you can choose how close you follow stuff.
Right, yeah.
That's what it's for.
That's quite cool.
And the thing that's kind of interesting about this bike is that it ties into everything on this bike. So the radar and the active cruise control will firstly, if it detects a car in front or a bike, works with bikes pretty well as we tested out.
Yeah, you'd hope so. Yeah, I mean, that would be a problem, but it's obviously a smaller target for it to latch onto, I suppose.
It works totally fine, I think. So, yeah, it'll firstly cut the power, of course, and just rely on engine braking to try and bring you down to a speed that will maintain that distance from the vehicle in front. If that's not enough, and it's like, oh, we're getting a bit close, it'll give you some brakes, and it's got a linked braking system. So it'll distribute braking between the front and rear and bring the speed down that way. It won't slam on, but it'll, give you sort of moderate braking levels.
Yeah.
And whilst it's doing that, mate, it's tied into the semi-active electronic suspension. So it'll give it a bit of firmness on the fork so it won't pitch forward. So you're just steering basically.
That I've got to say, that does sound impressive.
It is pretty impressive. And the way it works is pretty impressive. I mean, a lot of the launch was like smashing it on mountain roads, twisties, where you couldn't really switch it on. But towards the end of the day, on the way back to the hotel, they did give us a stretch of sort of A-roady motorway type thing. And we got to try it following bikes and cars and, whatever was on the road. And I think that's the scenario in which you would be using it, just to get between places if you wanted to focus your attention on what's happening around you rather than feathering the throttle constantly and sort of that sort of thing. So it's certainly not a replacement for paying attention. That's not the intention. It's just an evolution of normal cruise control.
Yeah. Well, the thing with cruise control, because I love cruise control on a bike.
Me too.
It's not a deal breaker to have it on there, but it's a real nice added bonus if you do. Obviously, if you're doing distance and stuff. But the ever frustrating thing with it is that you have to keep jogging it up. So if you've got like one touch cruise control, that's irritating as hell because you've got to keep turning it off and on. If you've got the actual one where you can jog up the speed, that's better. But traffic's inconsistent, so you constantly have to play with it whilst you're even if you're in sort of steady moving traffic, you have to play with it. So if it took that away from you and you didn't have to keep touching brake and disconnecting it, I'd say that's very appealing for a touring bike. For a GT, fantastic.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what you use your bike for. So if you use it for getting between places on the motorway and you're riding for work or commuting or those sorts of things, or maybe you've just always got a bit of a boring slog on the motorway to get to your favorite roads, then it's great. But if you're someone who just rides on a Sunday and just wants to go on twisty roads and maybe avoids motorways on their Calimoto app or whatever, you probably never use it, and so you may as well just buy the normal one and save yourself a few grand. But for me, I liked it. It's something I'd use, I think. So yes, that's what the radar is for.
All right, well, the next one is similar to that. I believe it's still on radar. So it's Timothy Lopez. Cool name. That's my name, but cooler somehow.
Yeah, it is. I didn't want to say it.
Okay, so Timothy says, I'm assuming the radar is for adaptive cruise control. Yes. That being said, I would like to know what conditions must exist for the adaptive cruise control to turn off automatically. When it turns off, does it convert to regular cruise control, or will the bike be fully manual at that time?
So, good question. Because there are certain scenarios in which it will switch off. I think they've tried to encourage people to use it for motorway riding. So it will only activate in fourth gear and above, and at 50 kilometers per hour and above. So if you want to use it I quite often use cruise control on my Tiger in like average speed checks. I don't know if you do that as well, Tim.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's say you've got like a 20 mile per hour average, speed check in town. Quite often I'll just stick cruise on.
Yeah.
And then you're not kind of like on and off the throttle. So you can't really use it for that. And also it won't let you do regular cruise control. So with the other bikes, I think like the Ducati Multistrada V4, you can choose between active or normal cruise control in the settings and sort of use the radar or not. With this bike, it's only got active cruise control, and there's no option to switch to manual or just kind of, what would you call it? Like inactive, like dumb cruise control, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, you stick it on a 50 kilometers per hour, fourth gear. But if the traffic in front of you slows down to 30 kilometers per hour or below, it will then start flashing at you and say it's going to deactivate, and it just switches off and goes fully manual. So this is why you got to pay attention big time. Of course,
yeah.
And I think also there were certain scenarios where we're going like round tight turns. I don't know if it was because of the speed or because it lost whatever was in front.
Yeah.
But there are situations where it does just kind of switch off. I think the main one is when you're coming down to a stop. If the traffic in front of you stops, you've got to be ready for it to disable and take over the braking.
Yeah.
This is why it's not autonomous. It's not driverless.
No, of course. But it's not like you're people, I think, get too familiar or comfortable in cars sometimes, especially when you see reports of like Teslas and things where people are just sort of like, the car's driving itself. It's not a self-driving car in the same way this isn't a self-driving bike. It's just there to enhance the cruise control, like you say.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's a slightly better version, but in the same way, if you're coming up to a junction and like you were using normal cruise control, you wouldn't just leave it on. You'd be like, oh, I'm probably going to have to stop here. So I'll turn it off, and then if you crashed, you wouldn't be like, oh, it was the cruise control's fault. Like they're not saying that it works, in that way. And so you have to use it like normal cruise control.
Is it quite intuitive to work or to use rather? Did you find it very easy to understand and start using it?
Yeah, you just switch on because you don't have to choose between normal or active. You just switch it on and it just
Those
works.
are the best kinds of upgrades is when it's a really smooth transition. You get it instantly. You don't have to learn something new. Yeah.
The only thing beyond normal cruise control that you have to think about is the distance setting. But the smallest distance setting, like when you're used to riding quite close on bikes, is actually quite big. And so I had it set on the smallest one. And then you just literally switch cruise control on, hit set like you normally would. And it behaves the same. It just slows down if you're getting too close.
Sure.
It does do other stuff. Like apparently if you're on the brakes and it thinks you're going to hit something, it will also assist you by giving you a little bit more braking as well. And what was the other thing? But the thing that I think you have to watch for, and it basically is the kind of like tighter turns. So if you're on a motorway or an A road where it's quite wide and open and you're just kind of belting along and the corners are so gentle that you don't slow down, it works totally fine. And if you slow down a little bit, it kind of works fine as well. But I've got to say, I did try and use it on not tight twisties, but when we were following other bikes in a group on sort of moderate roads where you might slow down 10, 20 miles per hour and then sort of nail it back out the corner. Yeah. Now, the problem with doing that is that the gap between bikes, much in the same way that when you watch motorsport, they give you a time difference, don't they? Because at certain parts of the track, the bikes are going slower.
Yes.
And at certain parts, they're going faster. So if you measure it in time, it gives you a better representation of what the gap is. And naturally, you bunch up in the corners. But because the active cruise control is working on a distance, that means that instead of naturally bunching up in the corner and then stringing out on the exit, it slows down a lot. If someone in front of you slows down, you're already really slowing down way before the corner.
Yeah.
And then when they nail it out the corner, because it's the cruise control, it sort of picks up a lot more gently than if you were just giving it full throttle.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really work in those scenarios because the rider behind you, I had to switch it off because I thought the guy behind me is going to be like, what on earth is he doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Slowing down so much and then not speeding up coming out the corner. So that's the only thing that's maybe not intuitive, but that was me trying to use it in a scenario where they haven't really designed it for that. And it was more of me trying to find the limits of what it's good at and what it isn't. So I'd say, don't use it for that. Don't use it on twisties. Enjoy the road. It's a brilliant bike. You know, CP3, inline triple, loads of power, great chassis, great brakes, great semi-active suspension, comfortable, all those great things. Loved it.
Cool.
So switch it off, enjoy. And then we go back on the motorway. Back on, mate.
Nice.
Job done.
All right. Next up, we have a question from Philip Parana. That's a cool name too. I don't understand adaptive cruise control, but no blind spot monitoring.
Yeah. So it has a front-facing radar, but no rear. Whereas something like the Tiger 1200, which we both sampled and enjoyed, has the rear, but not the forward-facing for the active cruise control. So I think, well, Triumph's reason for doing that, they said they focus grouped their potential customer base for that bike, and they didn't want to add to the cost of the bike by putting a front-facing radar because nobody wanted it. But everybody wanted blind spot warnings. I mean, you've tried those. What do you think of those?
Yeah, I didn't think I would be impressed or wowed by them, but I said the same thing to you on the day. It was most noticeable when you step back off the bike and go on one of the bikes without it, and you go, oh,
yeah,
I missed the little blinker. Yeah, I actually quite liked it. I mean, I don't know how much it adds to the cost of the bike, so that would be a bit of a trade-off if you go, like, do I really need it? But yeah, if it's there, it's a nice little added bonus. Very useful.
I think it's only available on the top tier Explorer models, but it's one of those things where 9 times out of 10, you know, it's no replacement for Lifesaver, you know, but that 1 or 2 times a day where you look and you're like, wait, the light's on, I'm going to look again. And you're like, oh shit, there is something there. Like, not that you necessarily would have hit it, but it's just this kind of like suggestion, isn't it? So, and I think the Triumph one's quite good because when you stick your indicator on, if there's something still there, I think it flashes to be like, look, like there's something there. Come on. I don't know why they didn't do that, to be honest, though, on this Yamaha. They really have kind of sold this much more complicated implementation. Really, the blind spot warnings. Like, if you think about how the adaptive cruise has to tie into the rest of the bike, all those, you know, into the engine, the braking, the suspension. It doesn't have to do the suspension thing, but it does. Whereas the blind spot warning is literally a radar on the back and then some lights on the mirrors. And apart from the indicator thing that Triumph have done, there's no need to really tie it into the rest of the bike's electronics. So it does seem like a simple, quick win. I think the only bike that has both, though, is the Ducati Multistrada V4. I don't think the KTM has both. The Triumph doesn't have both. The BMWs, I don't believe, have both either. So I think, personally, it's a shame. I would like to see both. I think it is. It's a different thing, but it's very useful. And some of them also give you rear impact warnings as well. So you'll get double flashes or something if there's something coming behind you. Right. Which I just think is a weird feature. Like, what would you do if something was...
Well, what are you going to do? I just brace. I don't know. I want to know.
Rev bomb is your only chance, isn't it, really? Like, let's say the common one would be stopping at a roundabout, wouldn't it? Yeah. And the driver's looking to their right to look for the traffic, and they may not have seen you because you're a smaller physical mass than a car. True. And so then they're coming up behind you. I mean, basically, they're the ones who need the warning, not you.
Yeah, and they're the ones that can see you. So, like, the warning won't... Yeah, definitely.
I think you could possibly nail it, is your only option. But if there's something in front of you or you're about to join a roundabout...
dump it and fly across the roundabout,
Yeah, I don't know. It all sounds risky. But then again, you know, if you've got the tech, if you've got the radar and the lights, maybe it's better to have that than not, to know that you're going to get hit before it happens. I'd love to see some like use cases of that. Like, you know, Ducati is saying it's got this great new feature, but like, can they replicate that on the test track to show how you might be able to avoid that? I don't really know, mate. To be honest, that's why I often position myself off to the side in those scenarios.
I've got a habit of it, and even if I'm following a car as well, I often, you know, favor a side. So you've got an out if they brake or something too harshly. Yeah.
Anyway, but it doesn't have both, and I'm also a little confused. Although, like with everything, it's all sort of development costs. I think the other thing that you have to realize is, like, when people talk about the cost of putting another feature on a bike, it's not just the hardware and software. Let's say. So like, you know, a radar and some lights is probably a couple $100 tops. But it's also the testing and homologation that all these features have to go through in order to be safe for use on the road. And I believe, I've been told anyway, when I've asked similar questions to other manufacturers, that is like a really big part of the cost. And also you've got limited development resource for each model. So you've got to choose where you deploy it. So it's probably something to do with that and keeping the cost of the bike
definitely
to a certain point.